Your child walks into the room and says, "Mom, Dad, sit down. I need to tell you something." Suddenly, time slows down. Your eyes widen. You feel tingly all over, and there's a sickening feeling of anticipation as they slowly begin to speak words you never imagined you would hear. "Mom, Dad, I've decided to become a police officer." Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast brings you stories and wisdom about life in law enforcement, giving support and encouragement to those who wear the badge. My guests today are Jim and Deanna Sutterby. Jim and Deanna have been married for 27 years, and Jim is a captain with the Overland Park, Kansas Police Department. They have 2 sons and a son-in-law who are in law enforcement. Today I'm asking Jim and Deanna about the experience parents have when their children go into law enforcement. They talk about law enforcement culture, ways to manage stress in the home, myths and misunderstandings that parents have about cops, and they give good, reassuring advice about how to communicate with and support your child in law enforcement. Listen for the pros and cons that they talk about from a mom and dad's point of view, and especially hear their encouragement that our society needs good people like your son or daughter to be police officers. I have with me here Jim and Deanna. Welcome. I'm so glad you guys were able to sit down and talk with me. I've been wanting this for several months, and glad to have you guys here.
We're excited to be here.
So can you guys tell me, what is the worst example you know of a parent who thought a law enforcement career for their child was going to be the end of the world?
What that question brings to my mind is an experience that I had actually with other law enforcement leaders. And when I was at the National Academy in Quantico, at a training with other chiefs, deputy chiefs, captains, other leaders in law enforcement, we had this leadership course. And while we were in the first day of this course, we were supposed to stand up, say our name, say what agency we were from, and tell the class something about us. And as we started going around the room, now there was probably 35 to 40 people in this room. And we started going around the room. Somehow we got to talking about, of course, naturally, people start talking about their kids and stating how many they had, kind of, what they were doing. And we got in, and suddenly we started hearing, what I started hearing from leaders was, well, my son is doing this. I wouldn't encourage them to get into law enforcement.
Really? Kind of cynical.
Cynical, yeah. And so this was like the overriding opinion in the room. And so I hate to be different, but I stood up when it was my time to give my introduction. And it was kind of awkward, but I was like, I find it incredibly amazing that we have a group of people who are passionate about people, passionate about law enforcement.
But they don't want their kids in it.
But they don't want their kids in it. And I thought, and I said, I would love it if my kids followed in my path.
Yeah.
I would love the opportunity to be able to have a second generation serving in this capacity, and who best to do it but our children. Yeah. And I know that sounds kind of odd to some of the people that are listening probably to this recording, but our kids know from our experiences,
the children who grew up in a law enforcement home, right,
know from just living in that home, what it takes to do the profession, what it takes to be a police officer, the dedication, the commitment, the nobility of it, the calling, and then all the culture aspects that where how you fit into the culture,
right?
And as a leader, if I have a son or a daughter who comes into law enforcement, and I know that their parents were law enforcement, they learn quicker.
Yeah.
They are more prepared.
They're already acclimated.
Yeah. And so it's more about just learning the job than learning the culture and the job at the same time.
Deanna, did you feel like that was true for your kids? Did they have an easier time, generally speaking, or in part, as far as like they grew up with dad was a cop? Did that help them?
It did. It helped not only with them knowing what expectations there are, it also helped in shift work and preparing their spouses and knowing what kind of sleep to get and just,
sleep in those weird hours.
Yes, yes, and speaking to their spouses about that. I do believe that it did prepare them and gave them a perspective that they could share with their wives because their wives did not live that same life.
Yeah. Do you think it affected, I mean, we're specifically talking a family where you're already in law enforcement. Did it affect even like who your kids married? Do you think that their taste and their choices of who they picked as a spouse, do you think that was affected by being a law enforcement family?
I do not.
You don't think so?
No.
Okay.
The boys let the girls know, their wives, up front that this was their plan.
Right.
They both worked at the sheriff's office when they were engaged and getting married. And, our daughter, who is married to someone that works at the jail, she grew up with her dad doing it, so that her role model set her up for what her husband is preparing to do.
Okay. So you guys have you're in a law enforcement family, have 2 sons and a son-in-law that's in law enforcement, either sworn officer or civilian employee. But that wasn't your case, though, Jim. You didn't come from a law enforcement family, though, right?
No. I might have had a distant relative somewhere in my in the line.
Yeah, I think I had a horse thief or somebody that was connected to law enforcement. I'm not sure,
but in the recent, no, there was nobody. I got into law enforcement, and a lot of people say they wanted to be a cop from when they were a kid. I wanted to be a mortician. That's what I really thought I would be doing. And then when I was about 16, I just felt this calling from the Lord. He just put me in a place where I made friends with a person that I worked with whose husband was going through the process with Kansas Highway Patrol.
Right.
He was in his 40s. He was trying to change career. But at that time in law enforcement, if you were over 40, you might as well not even apply because they weren't taking candidates that old.
Sure.
But it's changed obviously nowadays. But through his experiences, through what he went through, that just reinforces calling on my life. And so, that's how I got into it, is in just getting that passion for law enforcement.
But how did your parents react to that?
My mom was hesitant at first, but my mom and dad always were supportive of my dreams, of whatever I wanted to do. We were always encouraged. We were always, my parents always, told us, you could do anything you want, you set your mind to, and we know, and my mom and dad are both believers. So, one of the things that they really relied on is their faith in that is, hey, if Jim says God's calling him into law enforcement, then we're going to support him 100%.
They trusted that.
They trusted that to some degree. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Do you think there was a point at which your parents, maybe your mom, or, I hate to stereotype. Sometimes it's the dads that are really concerned. But you stereotypically imagine mom being scared for her baby, right? Do you think there was a point early on where they might have had second thoughts about you doing this, even though they were supportive? Do you think it scared them?
Oh, yeah. I think my mom and dad were fearful of, just the dangers of the job. And I think that's natural for parents to feel that way. Normal.
Yeah. Did you have any close calls early on that your parents reacted to that you remember?
I don't remember anything, and really, to be honest with you, I didn't really share those with my parents.
Sure.
My dad was always excited to hear about, what was going on at work, and just living vicariously through my experiences, and actually one of the greatest things that I ever got to do, I don't know if any agencies allow you to do this anymore, but right they cut this out right after I did it, but my dad got to go on a ride along with me.
Right.
And so that was a great experience for my dad. And my mom she always gets mad at my dad because she's like, you took my ride along from me, because my mom always wanted to come do that. But, to get back to the point is like, there's always this fear. But again, for those of us who, do have a faith in Christ or have a strong spiritual life, we kind of give those worries over to God. And my mom always, even as a kid, my mom would say, I pray for you every day.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's how she and my dad really dealt with it, is they just prayed about it.
She didn't have to start praying for you when the badge got pinned on.
Right.
She'd already she had a running start at it.
Exactly.
Deanna, what about you as far as let your kids go into law enforcement careers? Do they share anything with you that bothers you as a mom? Or do they shelter you from that?
No, they share.
Okay.
I don't know. I know that what they're doing has risks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't live in the inevitable, because that's always a possibility. So I too have prayed for them, and I had to learn when they started driving that either I trusted the Lord, or I don't. So through those steps, trust Him in their driving, and then when they decided to get into law enforcement, that I know that there is an inevitable. I know things are dangerous, and I don't live there. I give them to the Lord, and I live with that peace.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I don't care for them. I care very much.
Of course. Yeah.
So I don't just live in fear. I
love that you brought up driving, because statistically, it's more dangerous for them to be driving than for them to be in law enforcement.
Right.
Law enforcement has some danger to it.
It does.
But yeah, we do a lot of things in life that are dangerous, that have risk connected to it.
I used to tell my mom this, she'd be like, it seems like it's such a dangerous profession. I said, well, I could walk across the street and get hit by a car.
Yeah.
And, sometimes this sounds, this is coming from a cop. Okay. So this perspective is like, sometimes when it's time, it's time.
Yeah.
And, I love how Deanna, said that. It's like we can choose to live in fear as parents of law enforcement kids, or we can embrace that and really pray for them and be a support, so that as they're going out, that they are empowered to do their job, and they're not worried about, we're not supportive, or we don't think they can do it, or whatever might cause them to second guess themselves.
Yeah. I'm a parent too, of course. I have 5 kids. And so a lot of my fear as a parent probably is coming from the fear of the unknown. And a lot of times our misconceptions as parents really, really exacerbate that fear and make it so much worse.
Yes.
And so what kind of myths or maybe just misconceptions do you think people have about law enforcement that might be affecting how they feel about their kid going into law enforcement?
Because of our authority to arrest and to take people's freedom away. That's what people see us as. They see us as bad people.
Like a threat.
We're a threat. What happens when a police officer gets behind you? You immediately tense up. You immediately check your speedometer. You immediately oh my gosh, I got to do everything just perfect unless this guy behind me is going to pull me over. And we're kind of driving behind you going, man, this person's driving so slow. But they're just, they're just, you have the fear of that authority behind you. They're going to pull you over and maybe, cause you to get a ticket or, whatever the case may be. And I think that's like just 10% of our job. 90% of our job is helping people in crisis.
Yeah.
And as Dan and I were talking, and you were talking earlier before we started recording, it's the idea that we are serving people and we're really helping people more through maybe they've been a victim of a crime.
Yeah.
Maybe they're homeless. Yeah. Maybe they've been abused. Maybe they're a child and they've been abused, or any number, or we're delivering a death notification because a loved one died in another state, and now we're the ones that are coming to your house to tell you the terrible news. But we do all these things in service, and
they're compassionate acts.
They're compassionate acts. Yes. They're loving acts where we're taking people and we're kind of putting our arm around them, and we're saying, look, it's going to be okay. We're here for you. How can we help you? And that other portion of it that people see on the news and on, where we're that enforcement arm, which is a part of our job. It's a smaller portion than what I think people really realize it is.
Yeah. I did a ride along that with a 22, 23-year-old officer, pretty new. And I was his very first ride along. And we were busy the whole day, and it was going from one place to another. We did not arrest a single person. Actually, we did witness an arrest. Someone else got arrested. But the officer I was with, the officer I was with, most of his calls were helping people.
Yeah.
Helping people that may have been victims of a crime or just thought that they were in danger or were having a family dispute. And he was going around. This he's a young man. He's an officer. He was, in his early 20s, and yet he's acting almost in a parental kind of way and taking the good upbringing he received and sharing it with these people in crisis.
Yeah.
And I'm just watching this as a chaplain. I didn't have to intervene. This young man was handling it so well, so much compassion and concern for these people, strangers to him, but yet he's loving them. I don't think people understand that.
No, I don't think people understand how many times that officers dig into their own pockets.
Sure.
To buy a hotel room or to put groceries in somebody's refrigerator.
Yeah.
We could go on and on. You and I have Deanna's seen these experiences where officers just, they are selfless in their service. Yeah. And I think that is definitely one of the biggest myths. I think another myth is, we were talking about danger earlier.
Right.
And, this idea that the job is dangerous, but there is a lot of danger mitigation, as I call it, that goes into what we do for law enforcement. We train them to be safe. We train them to use good tactics, to use, and inevitably, like we've talked about, there is an ultimate danger to this job that you could do everything perfect and you could lose your life in the service to your community. But we really make that a really hard thing because
there's procedures in place to protect you.
There's procedures in place to protect you. And if you listen and learn and do these things on the street, well, I'm proof that you can survive a 25-year career in law enforcement if you do those things.
Right.
Sometimes things happen, and unfortunately, Overland Park lost Officer Mosier this last summer, last May, and that was something that he didn't do anything wrong. Right. He unfortunately encountered somebody that was armed, and in that confrontation, they both died.
Yeah,
and he was murdered. So it can happen, but we try to mitigate that as much through our training and practice.
And the training does prevent both civilian deaths and officer deaths.
Yes.
Thousands of times every day.
Mm-hmm.
But that, of course, doesn't make the news. You don't write news stories about the planes that land safely.
Right. So you're depicted as somebody who wants to, we were joking beforehand. It's like, I got into law enforcement to drive fast and shoot guns. That's far from, that we
and
joke
good
about
at writing reports.
Right. I got into it to write reports, but that's far from the truth. People, even though it's corny and we hear it a lot, people get into this job to serve and help people in crisis.
Deanna, what do you think about what Jim was just saying about the safety and like the procedures that protect your children? I mean, you have at least one of your boys is in detention. And so I imagine he actually goes into a pod with criminals.
He hasn't yet.
Okay.
He will. We have one on the street in Colorado.
Okay.
And one getting ready to train to be a deputy here. And they are trained every year for so many scenarios, driving, range, all the time. So I don't fear that they can't protect themselves or haven't learned, and to also protect the citizens that they want to serve.
Yeah.
Because as Jim was saying, the officers do have compassion. They are out there to serve. They don't want to have to pull their gun. They don't have to chase you in their car. But as I told the boys when they said they wanted to get into it, that you're going to have to help that drunk on his worst day, throwing up in the back of your car.
Yeah.
You are going to have to help him. And if you can't, and you know you can't, then don't get into it. Yeah. Because you're going to have to clean your car without wanting to beat him up. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe, too, people who don't know anybody in law enforcement, like if their only interaction with the police officers when they see them in the rearview mirror, then maybe they don't understand how much compassion and how much, cleaning up somebody's vomit in the back seat of your cruiser, that's a thing that happens, and nobody likes that. But a lot of officers do it pretty willingly because they ultimately want to help people. And so, it's not the fun part of the job, but it is a part they're willing to do because they care. And that may be an aspect of the police personality that a parent doesn't realize is actually a big part of who those guys are. Yeah.
Right. And I've told them, again, when they said they wanted to do this, that I understand that they are the force that stands between good and evil. And they have to stand up for that. And officers don't want to be thought of as victims, as right now a lot of people are looking at them, and because of what's coming out against them, they want to see them as victims and stand up for them. They are our defense.
Yeah.
And I understand that.
What are the pros and cons? I mean, we don't want to paint too rosy a picture. We don't want to paint too bleak of a picture. But what are the pros and cons of having your child go into law enforcement?
Well, for me, it was different than what I expected. I always, like I said earlier in the conversation, I always hoped that we really thought my daughter would be the police officer in the family.
Really?
We did.
And she'll probably laugh if she listens to this, but, because she and I are similar in personality. And so I just really thought, oh, great, I'm going to have a daughter that goes into law enforcement. And how will I feel about that? But that didn't happen. She decided to go a different route, and the two boys ended up getting into it. And I found myself, like, I didn't worry too much about things on the street when I was working. It was just like, I just got in the car and it's just the job. That's, maybe when I was first on, it was a little more stressful because you're like, okay, I got through training, but I didn't see everything in training. And so what happens when I get this call? Oh my gosh, I got this domestic. I never got this in training. So, but once you get all these calls underneath your belt and you get experience, then it becomes just part. Now, when my sons got hired as deputies, especially the one that's in Colorado, he started out, he worked with Johnson County Sheriff's Office in Kansas, got right out of the academy, went right into dispatch, and was a dispatcher for a couple of years, and then got an opportunity to go out to Colorado, and he took a road position out there. So what I found myself doing as a dad is just talking to him about, okay, you got to be focused. You got to have your head on a swivel. In doing all those things, coaching him on from the dad perspective, because I want him to be safe. Right. And I started, instead of kind of coming from a cop to cop, it was more, I reverted back to my role as a dad. Yeah. Yeah. And I just found that to be kind of interesting. Yeah. As I thought back and reflected on it, because we're always dads, we're always moms, no matter whether you're a police officer, whether you've had experience in law enforcement and now your kids are going in there, or whether nobody's in your family's ever been a cop and you're going into law enforcement, you're their parents. Yeah. First. Yeah. Can you ever let go of that? I mean, that feeling of wanting to reach out and protect them? I mean, it's always there. Even all the hours and distance between here and Colorado, it's there. We do FaceTime and discuss these things, and it is interesting watching him coach, I guess, as he's talking about how his day went, and
it's just interesting. But I don't know. I haven't feared it then, but yeah, I listen to what he says, and sometimes I'm like, that's something I need to pray about, because he might do that again.
Would it be better to have fewer details?
No, I want to hear. I think it's important that officers share with their spouses, and as he's just getting started, share with us, because I feel that is, we want to know what they've done during the day, and want to hear the stories. I think that's important to share, so that not only that he can go through it again in his mind and how maybe he could improve, but just so we know how his day went, and that his wife does. I feel it's kind of selfish if an officer doesn't share his day, or if a spouse doesn't want to hear it. Yeah. I think that's something that they need to communicate, and because in all marriages, communication is the number one key.
How do you find a balance between, the advice to, leave the work at the work, leave the job, back there, don't take it home with you. How do you balance that advice versus what you're just describing about sharing and having good communication with your spouse, with your parents? Is there a way to know when there's too much, or maybe that would be maybe certain members of the family that are just not ready to hear a story that's too exciting?
I don't know if there's ever a story that's too exciting from a police officer, but you can leave the angst. There are days that you meet that most of your calls are people that just take you to that limit. Yeah. And you don't want to take that home, and then if you bring the angst in, then you share it. You share that. It turns into angers and arguments, and the kids don't have their toys picked up. Well, maybe they left them out to play with you. So when you walk in that door, it's almost like you need to almost refresh yourself, which is very hard to remember, because your spouse, like I was a stay-at-home mom for many years, and if he were to come in angry, I have had a lot of weight on my shoulders through the day. Sure. Yeah. And to clash those two does not make for a very good evening. No. And on sharing too much, I don't need to know how much of what was on the street. Right. I don't need to know, if they did something in your car, what it looked like. I mean, just that's a little
oddly specific, Deanna.
Yes, that's
Jim,
a little.
Are you?
No, he never shared that, and I didn't ever want to know. But that's going what you said too far. Right. But hearing a story from a police officer, I mean, that's their experience, and how did you handle it? And I know sometimes that leads to officers have to hear from family members, well, what do you think about this law? I got pulled over, and, So in answering your question on when not to share, it might be at those times that you feel that someone might take advantage. Right. And just ask you all kinds of questions because you have left work. Yeah. And, your work was earlier, and this is fun.
Yeah. I think it's important, too. There's a lot of calls that I've seen that are just so hopeless. There's no, without a time machine, there's no fixing the problems that this particular household is having. Mm-hmm. And that is so depressing. Yes. And so demoralizing. I think it is important to understand that your child is seeing that kind of stuff and learning how to cope with it. Mm-hmm. And hopefully using very healthy and productive methods to cope with it, not destructive methods. But you should understand that they're seeing a lot of that hopelessness. They are. And they're kind of having their nose rubbed in it. And that's important to be sympathetic to that. And if you see it come out in frustration and all kinds of little strange behaviors you didn't used to see in your kid, that's because they're having a lot of that come at them. And that's where I think family can kind of gather around somebody and be encouraging and encourage, like, let's do healthy things. Let's take a family walk. Let's get real involved in some really healthy activity or hobby or church and other things that can help us see and get a good perspective on the world versus that really gritty, nasty thing you had to experience that, like I said, some of those situations, there's just no fixing them. the officers aren't happy about that. They're saddened by that. So yeah, I think that's important for families to recognize, especially if you've not been exposed to law enforcement before your kid gets in. What other kind of pros and cons do you guys think there are to having a kid in law enforcement? Are there advantages or disadvantages people should look out for?
Well, I think one of the pros, I'll go with the pro first, then I'll go with the con. But
okay.
I think one of the pros is you should and can be proud of your son or daughter for entering law enforcement.
Yeah.
The world wants to tell us that it's not a noble profession. Yeah. But I'm here to say, from a dad's perspective, I am so very proud, and I know Deanna is too, of our children, of our boys, for taking on this extreme responsibility.
Yeah.
That
serve, many other people are not willing to do.
That many people aren't willing to do. And it's okay to tell people that your son or daughter is a police officer and how proud you are, because they've been called, Romans 13 spells it out. They've been called and ordained by God to do this profession and
to be servants of God.
To be servants of God. Yeah. And that's what we've been talking about here. Is the myth is that we don't serve, and we do serve. That's 90% of our job is serving people, and the other 10% we write reports and arrest people and do all these other little things. Eat ice cream and get coffee and stuff like that. Maybe a donut once in a while. But so we have those things, and so I think you can be proud. Don't feel like you gotta hide that. Now, obviously, we don't go around saying this is their address and phone number and give them a call and tell them how proud we are. But there's a safety aspect to that,
right.
And I think that's the con. Is sometimes you want to say what your children do, and you can't because of the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
Or you have strong feelings about law enforcement and how people treat law enforcement. And you may be in a conversation, and you may be, sometimes you just have to be reserved and sharing your opinion because you don't want to affect their job or whatever, because maybe a comment gets taken out of perspective or whatever. Well, so there's a con that maybe you have to hold back a little bit sometimes and watch what you're. I don't post stuff on social media about my kids. Sometimes we don't post pictures. We don't do certain things because we have to have a sense of security and refuge in the fact that they are safe.
Yeah. For every person that's going to buy your child lunch at the restaurant because they see them in uniform and they buy their lunch, there's somebody else out there somewhere. Hopefully they never run into them, but there's somebody else out there that has a chip on their shoulder and might, wish them ill. And so there is that dynamic where you can be very proud of your kids being in law enforcement, but at the same time, if they were a firefighter, they would have a firefighter license plate. Right. And a sticker and whatever, and law enforcement doesn't do that. They kind of keep it a little more low key because you don't know for sure if somebody's a supporter or somebody's against you.
Yeah.
And so your kid is entering into that world, and they just have to be smart about it. Lots of people have long, happy, successful careers. They never pull their gun. They never do anything that's extraordinary or super, super dangerous, but they are ready to, if that's necessary. Mm-hmm. And they, are very happy and very proud of what they do.
Yes.
But there is some risk there. Like I said, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture, but I also don't want to make it all sound bleak either, because it's just such a noble profession. If people saw what I see when I'm out as a chaplain with their kids, if they saw what I saw, it would move them to tears. What a beautiful, beautiful thing it is to have these young men and women, white, black, every variety of person, male and female, that are out there serving their community and doing it so selflessly. Mm-hmm. It's really beautiful.
It's amazing.
But a lot of times parents just don't understand that if they haven't had firsthand experience in it.
I think another con can be, trying to help keep your law enforcement officer grounded, in a sense that not everybody's out to kill you, not everybody's out to hurt you, but we do have quirks because we're always on guard.
Right.
And so understanding that, Deanna, we joke about this, and even I do this. I've gotten better about it as I've gotten, kind of up in command, maybe because I'm not as hyper vigilant as I was in the past. I don't know. Deanna could answer that better, but I used to always have to, sit with my back to the wall and watch the door, and so when we went into a restaurant, Deanna would ask me, do you want to sit over here or do I, and so, understanding that's just, it's just part of...
It's not paranoid, but it's vigilant.
It's vigilant.
So, Deanna, what happens at Thanksgiving? You can't all sit facing the door.
That's true.
Do you ever have to have a raffle for who gets to sit with their back to the wall, or
we lock the doors?
Yeah. We turn the table sideways and all the chairs face.
Right, exactly. So. It's like the Last Supper. Everybody's facing the same way. Yeah.
That's a safe environment. We don't have to worry about people coming in and out.
Right.
Like we do a restaurant. And no, that's our time. We do get to relax. We, about the hypervigilant or the officer, it reminds me that, you should just carry one gun, not three, when you're off duty. I mean, that's okay. But no, our sons don't do that. But that's in my mind. It's that picture of all the guns. But no, home is the refuge, safe place, coming in. I know I tried to make that for Jim when the kids were little, that have ESPN on, the table cleaned off, because when it was cluttered, things seemed chaotic. But no, that's where we get to be safe and don't have to worry about intruders necessarily.
Yeah. One myth that I've heard is that it takes a statistic and then blows it out of proportion, that there are a lot of divorces in law enforcement. And none of us want to see our kids' marriages fail. And so it's a very stressful job. It is a high percentage that, relatively high percentage that do have marital trouble, that kind of thing. But you're not fated to lose everything. You're not fated to become an alcoholic. You're not fated to get divorced. What kind of concerns about your kids' wellness, their psychological health and spiritual health? What kind of concerns do you have as a mother, for your kids in law enforcement?
So when it comes to their marriage, it's just listening to their attitude and how they treat each other. And, any marriage can go sideways. And like I said earlier, it's absolute communication about everything, just the openness. And it's becoming more acceptable to seek out help. Whereas before it was like, oh man, you're going to go see a doctor. You need, maybe you shouldn't be on the street, but it's just listening to them as parents. And you get, your children.
A stereotype you might have heard about law enforcement 25 years ago is not necessarily still true.
Right.
Yeah. They are definitely, there's more officer wellness stuff in the last 40 years that has increased year by year by year. And more programs, more helpers, not just chaplains, but, staff psychiatrists and all kinds of counselors and support and all kinds of things that are there to help both law enforcement and law enforcement spouses. There's resources in most departments to help your kid and to help, their family. And so that's maybe you heard something, maybe you experienced something, maybe, it wasn't you in law enforcement, it was your parents who were in law enforcement, and you thought, oh, I don't want that for my kids because I things didn't always work out well for me growing up. Well, things have changed, and so there's hope, and it's not all doom and gloom. There's actually quite a few resources and a lot of people who are very eager to help law enforcement families.
There's one thing about being committed and dedicated to serving others, but there's also that part of, that we talk to our kids about is, you need to have hobbies. You need to have friends outside of law enforcement. You need to have, obviously faith, and their spiritual wellness is a big thing for us. And, making sure that they're, that they're in their Bibles, that they're in a good church where they have community. So these things help keep the officer balanced and in reality. Because when you're so immersed in law enforcement, then you are over hyper vigilant. Then you are overstimulated with law enforcement, and then that's where burnout occurs. That's where you start being so cynical, and because nobody is telling you the truth. You don't have all your friends are just, it can be kind of a negative environment if all your friends think the administration is out to get them. So it's helping. One of the things that Deanna did really well for me is just helping me to stay balanced in that part of my life. And so now we're trying to pass that on to our children. Hey, yes, you can be dedicated, but let's be healthy about it so that you're not burning yourself out and you're not causing problems in your personal life and your marriage and those kind of things. So.
Okay, excellent. What would be your final words of wisdom to parents? I mean, maybe their kid just is bringing this up, or you just notice maybe your kid's in high school and they keep talking about law enforcement and they keep showing interest, and maybe I want to discourage it, or I'm not sure if I should discourage it. What would be your final word of wisdom for parents who are facing that child going into law enforcement?
I would say support it, because we need good people.
Yeah.
We need people who want to do the job.
Yeah.
And if it's just like anything else. We need plumbers. We need welders. And how hard is it to find a good plumber and a good welder nowadays? These trades, and you're like, well, these trades are fading out, and who's going to do those jobs? Well, if we don't encourage the people who want to be police officers, who's going to do the job? Who's going to stand between good and evil? Right. And if your son or daughter is a good person, who I imagine most of us think our children are, good people, then and we want to encourage them to get into this profession, and then know that the organization's going to train them. They're going to prepare them. They're not just going to throw them out there on the street and say, okay, now you're a cop, go do it. We used to do that 30, 40 years ago. I've got stories from people that were veterans when I came on the force. They're like, I had one day of training and then I was out on the street. But we don't do that anymore. We spend weeks and weeks and weeks preparing and training, and now
then
there's
ongoing training through their career.
De-escalation. Yes. I think, understand this too. One, it's a calling. The job is noble. It is so noble, and we need good people to do it. And third, that your son or daughter is gonna be prepared to do the job. Yeah. And if you treat people with respect, and you do the job the right way, I honestly believe that they will have a long career. Yeah. I like what you said about not stopping them, because I know several officers who wanted to go into law enforcement. Their parents had them go into a different field. They went to college for something completely different, and then 5-10 years later went into law enforcement anyway. Yeah. It circles back around, right? Any words of wisdom, Deanna? Well, I would say, as a mom raising your children, you see their wishes and their dreams and their wants. And I encourage them. I said, if this is what you want to do, then you go up and do an intern or work there and start in the records, or just to see, because they can get a taste of it then. Yeah. If I believe that if they're called and they know it and they want to do it, encourage them, because once they get in it, they will... In the academy, they will know right away. This is something I can do, or I need to backtrack a little. Yeah, absolutely. But just, I would encourage them as you would your children in any other job. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you both for talking with me today. I really appreciate it. I hope parents out there who might hear this also appreciate the encouragement from both of you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so thankful that Jim and Deanna came in to record with me today. I've known them for several years and have played basketball with Jim and one of their sons for a long time. And you get to know a person's character, good and bad, when you play ball with them. Needless to say,
I knew the Sutterbys would have a grounded and sound approach to managing the stress of having children in law enforcement. I hope you noticed that their approach had a couple of noteworthy anchors. First, they are people of faith, and that helps them tremendously in dealing with fear and things that are outside of their control. Second, they take an intelligent and rational view of the facts. Law enforcement is dangerous, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a profession with more deliberate training in safety and protection. Knowing these things, and especially seeing them up close, does wonders to calm the fear that you might feel as a parent. And let me reiterate a point that I made during the conversation. I do ride-alongs with these young officers. They are so professional and so well-trained. And if you saw the compassion and the goodness that they demonstrate while they help people, you would be so proud. If your son or daughter is a good person, encourage them as they prepare and train for law enforcement. If they don't become police officers, who will? If you liked what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
Because it was tough work. I mean, it was at age 39, it was like, man, I remember going to one of the workout sessions when I was very first starting this, and so I would go to workout sessions in order to get myself in shape, get myself ready for the academy.
Sure. And
I remember that first workout session, and, you think, oh, I'm in pretty good shape. And I went to that session and I thought I was going to die. I thought, during that time too, man, I was working out and I was just like, this is terrible. Why am I voluntarily living this misery? I'm choosing to do this. And I was like, this is awful.
And you're working out with people 20 years younger than you.
Oh, yeah.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.